In October of 1974, a coastal survey crew stepped into the ruins of Bellweather House after a storm tore open the pantry floor. They expected rot. They expected brick. They expected the usual debris left behind by a plantation house that had been abandoned for more than 100 years. What they found was a child's slate. It was wedged upright inside a false air shaft beneath the hearth, wrapped in oilcloth, and covered with 31 names written in a careful hand. Not full names. Just first names: Esther, Malachi, Rose, Ben, Tilda. And beneath the last name, one sentence had been scratched so hard into the slate that the stylus had cracked the surface. "Tell them we were never sent on." That sentence changed the entire excavation. Bellweather House sat on a strip of salt marsh west of Darien, Georgia, where black water cut through reeds, and the trees leaned away from the wind. In the 1830s it had belonged to Silas Fenwick, a rice planter, timber broker, and shipping agent who made a public fortune by moving goods between plantations and the coast. His wife, Ada Ruth Fenwick, was remembered in one surviving county history as quiet, educated, and unusually orderly. That was the word they used. Orderly. The word came back again and again. Her pantry accounts were orderly. Her household books were orderly. Her letters were orderly. Even the garden rows described by visitors were arranged with a severity that made the place feel more like an institution than a home. But after the storm opened the floor, the survey crew discovered that Ada Fenwick had kept another kind of order beneath the house. A crawlspace that should have been only 3 feet deep continued down into brick steps. The steps led to a sealed passage. The passage led to rooms. And the rooms led to a story Bellweather had spent generations trying to swallow. At first, the state archaeologists thought the hidden space was a smuggling cellar. That would not have been strange along that coast. Hidden rooms, false walls, and illegal storage pits were common enough in river properties tied to shipping. But the Bellweather rooms were not built for barrels. They were built for people. There were narrow bunks set into the walls. There were clay water jars marked with tally strokes. There were nail holes where shelves had been torn away. There were hooks in the ceiling beams for hanging lamps low enough that light would not leak through the upper boards. And at the far end of the first chamber, behind a brick partition disguised as a chimney support, the archaeologists found a cedar trunk lined with zinc. Inside were Ada Fenwick's private books, 37 notebooks, 6 bundles of letters, 2 household ledgers, and a smaller packet tied with blue sewing thread, labeled in Ada's own hand, "Lower arrangements, not for public inventory." The first notebooks were almost disappointing. Ada wrote about weather, preserves, bedding, church visits, and the difficulty of keeping salt out of the linen. She wrote about Silas traveling to Savannah, about her headaches in late summer, about the number of candles used in the dining room. Her voice was precise, cool, and ordinary. Then, in the winter of 1838, the entries began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that the researchers noticed a new phrase appearing between the butter count and the laundry schedule: the lower guests. At first, Ada used the phrase as if it meant temporary visitors, people delayed by bad weather, workers waiting for transport, men and women between one place of employment and another. But by 1840, the phrase had changed. The lower guests became the lower number. Then the lower number became the silent inventory. And that was when the Bellweather case stopped being a strange architectural discovery and became something much darker. Silas Fenwick had built his public reputation on what he called coastal labor forwarding. On paper, it sounded harmless. A plantation in inland Georgia needed a carpenter. A turpentine camp needed barrel makers. A rice field owner needed hired hands for drainage work. A shipyard needed strong laborers for a season. Silas offered transportation, paperwork, lodging, and placement. He presented himself as a respectable middleman,
A man who knew the roads, the rivers, the planters, the sheriffs, the docks, and the contracts. But the papers found at Bellweather showed a different business. People were arriving at the estate with letters in their pockets that promised work somewhere else. Some were free black laborers. Some were hired craftsmen. Some were enslaved people being moved under disputed papers. Some were women traveling with family members who had been promised wages after harvest. Many were young enough to believe that a written contract could protect them. They came through Bellweather because Silas controlled the transfer point. And then they did not leave. Ada recorded the process with the kind of language that makes cruelty sound like bookkeeping. 4 arrived by river at dusk. 2 protested the change in route. 1 speaks some French. 1 is skilled with rope. All were given supper before lower placement. Lower placement. That was her phrase. Not abduction. Not imprisonment. Not disappearance. Lower placement. The archaeologists compared Ada's notebooks to courthouse filings from 5 counties. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Between 1839 and 1861, at least 127 people were listed in surviving records as transferred through Silas Fenwick's agency. The records often stated that they had departed one property and been accepted for placement at another. But the receiving sites had no matching arrival entries. Letters from families and employers began to appear in church correspondence across the coast. A brother asking whether his sister had reached the mill near Savannah. A mother asking whether her son had crossed the ferry at Bellweather Landing. A ship carpenter in Brunswick asking why 3 apprentices sent through Fenwick had never appeared. The questions were polite at first, then desperate, then gone, because in that world, paper could travel farther than a person. And when the right man signed the right receipt, the missing became an administrative inconvenience. Ada knew it. Her notebooks proved she knew it. The earliest disturbing entry came in March of 1841. Silas says their delay is necessary, as the new agreements are not yet settled. I asked why the young woman cried so long after supper. He said she had misunderstood the kindness of the house. 2 pages after that entry had been cut out. Not torn. Cut. A knife had been used cleanly against the binding, leaving a perfect narrow scar where the paper used to be. The same scar appeared again and again through the early notebooks. Ada would begin to describe something. Stop. Remove the page. And then resume on the next page with weather, bread flour, or the number of eggs collected from the yard. It was the rhythm of a woman trying to confess, and then trying to survive her own confession. But survival did not keep her innocent. By 1846, her writing no longer trembled around the subject. It managed it. She kept records of food allotments for the lower rooms. She tracked lamp oil, blanket rotations, and illnesses. She noted which confined workers were useful with fine stitching and which ones were unsuitable for quiet work. Quiet work meant work that could be done beneath the house without drawing attention. Rope splicing, textile finishing, cigar box assembly, mending sails, sorting seed, copying labels, small industry hidden under polite floors. The rooms were built to keep the outside world from hearing labor that was never supposed to exist. Vent shafts were disguised as drainage piers. Tool benches were padded with cork and moss. Doors closed into brick pockets so no hinge would cry out during the night. The entire house was an instrument built to make people disappear without making a sound. And Ada Fenwick kept it tuned. The most haunting evidence was not in the notebooks. It was in the walls. When the excavation team reached the second lower chamber, they found messages carved into brick mortar and cypress boards. Some were names. Some were dates. Some were lines from hymns. Some were only marks, repeated daily until the hand that made them stopped counting. One sentence appeared in 3 separate places. Not Savannah. Not Savannah. That was all. For years, The people confined below Bellweather had been told they were waiting for transportation to Savannah or Macon or a plantation farther upriver. They were told papers needed correction. They were told a road was flooded. They were told a sheriff had to be consulted. They were told the delay would be brief. Days became weeks. Weeks became seasons. After a while, the lie did not need to be convincing. It only needed to be repeated by the people who controlled the food, the stairs, and the lamps. One carved board listed 7 names beside a crude drawing of a boat. The boat was scratched out. Under it, someone had written, "The river goes past us." That line bothered Dr. Helen Marr, the archaeologist who led the second season of excavation. In her field notes, she wrote that the Bellweather rooms did not feel like improvised hiding places. They felt like a long-term system. Every passage had a purpose. Every inconvenience had been solved. Every human need had been reduced to a problem of storage, scheduling, and concealment. Food came down from the pantry at night. Waste passed through a narrow brick chute that connected to the estate's drainage works. Water was stored in clay jars, refilled from the old cistern. Work moved upward through baskets marked as laundry. Finished goods left Bellweather as household production. On the surface, Ada Fenwick was praised for running an efficient home. Below the floor, her efficiency had another meaning. The notebooks showed that Ada's role grew slowly. At first, she claimed ignorance, then reluctance, then concern, then responsibility, and then pride. In 1849, she wrote, "The lower schedule is improved since I separated the talkers from the steady hands. Supper complaints have decreased. Work output is more regular. Silas does not notice these refinements, but they are necessary if the arrangement is to continue without disorder." Without disorder. There was that word again. Ada had not merely adjusted to Bellweather's secret. She had made it more efficient. The darker turn came through a young woman named Lottie Bell. Lottie appeared in the notebooks in August of 1852. She had been traveling with 2 men from Liberty County, carrying a letter that promised paid work at a coastal boarding house. Ada described her as 18 or nearly so, sharp-eyed, reads better than she admits. Lottie was assigned to sewing work below. For several months, Ada's notes mention her repeatedly. Lottie asks too many questions. Lottie has counted the steps. Lottie knows the supper baskets are not for the kitchen. Lottie sang after lights out and encouraged the others. Then the entries stop. For 6 weeks, Ada does not mention her. The archaeologists might have missed the silence if not for the child's slate. Because one of the names scratched into that slate was Lottie. And beside it, written smaller than the rest, was a second phrase, "She knew the bell rope." The bell rope was the hidden mechanism that nearly exposed Bellweather. In the original construction, a servant bell system had connected the pantry, dining room, and upstairs bedrooms. Silas had modified it when the lower chambers were expanded. One small brass bell in the rear hall could be rung from below if there was a medical emergency, a broken lamp, or a dispute serious enough to threaten the system. The bell was supposed to be silent unless Ada permitted it. But in October of 1852, according to a neighboring diary, the rear bell rang during a dinner visit. Not once, 6 times. No servant was in the hall. No rope moved above the floor. The guests laughed nervously. Silas blamed damp weather affecting the wires. Ada wrote nothing that night. The next morning, she wrote one sentence. "The bell will be removed before week's end." After that, no visitor ever recorded hearing a bell inside Bellweather House again. But the lower rooms remembered it. 3 carved messages mention the bell. One says, "Ring until the roof answers." Another says, "Lottie found the string." The third is unfinished. Just 4 words. "They heard us once." That was the point in the story where Dr. Marr began to believe the hidden rooms had not been a secret from everyone. Someone had heard. Maybe only once. Maybe only for a moment. But someone above had heard a sound that did not belong to ordinary house life. And the house survived the moment by turning it into a joke. That is how Bellweather protected itself. Not through perfect silence, but through respectable explanations. A bell rang by itself. The weather did it. A hired man disappeared. He changed his mind. A woman never reached Savannah. Her papers were mistaken. A child asked for his mother from behind the pantry wall. The house was settling. Every warning had a polite answer. And polite answers, spoken by powerful people, were often enough. By the late 1850s, Silas Fenwick's health began to decline. The notebooks never used the word dementia, but Ada's descriptions are clear. He forgot names. He signed the wrong receipt. He asked the same question several times in one morning. He became angry when corrected. He misplaced keys and then accused servants of theft. For a while, Ada complained about his unreliability. Then her tone changed. In 1859, she wrote, "It may be Providence that his mind loosens while mine remains sound. The arrangement can no longer depend upon his public confidence alone. I have taken the duplicate keys." From that entry forward, Ada's handwriting becomes cleaner. The codes become more organized. The household ledgers begin to hide the lower population in plain sight. A barrel of flour meant 2 new arrivals. Lamp oil meant sickness. Blue thread meant punishment. 6 yards of muslin meant a transfer that never happened. The strangest code involved preserves. Peach preserves meant a person still asking to leave. Fig preserves meant a person had stopped asking. Researchers found the preserves ledger in the zinc-lined trunk, and at first thought it was domestic accounting. Then they realized there were winter weeks when Ada recorded making more preserves than the orchard could possibly have produced. The fruit was not fruit, it was a census. By 1862, with war pressing toward the coast, Bellweather became more dangerous. The trolls moved irregularly through the area. Planters argued over labor, loyalty, and evacuation. Federal raids along the coast made old systems harder to hide. River movement was watched more closely than before. Ada understood that the lower rooms were no longer only profitable. They were evidence. And evidence has a way of becoming louder when a regime begins to crack. Her entries from that period are cold enough to feel unreal. The old explanations will not survive a military inquiry. The lower number cannot be released as a group. Those with memory of Lottie are most dangerous. Silas does not comprehend the risk. I do. That last line was underlined twice. I do. This was the discovery that changed how historians understood Ada Fenwick. For years after Bellweather was first studied, researchers described her as a witness who had been morally absorbed into her husband's crime. A woman who began afraid, became accustomed, and then became useful. But the later decoding showed something worse. By the time the war reached the Georgia coast, Silas was no longer directing the lower rooms. Ada was. She chose who ate first. She chose who worked where. She chose which letters were destroyed. She chose which names were copied into false records. And she chose what would happen when the outside world came too close. The final full entry in Ada's notebook was dated February 3, 1864. The lower number has been reduced in spirit but not in fact. Several remain persuaded that staying below protects them from soldiers. Several do not. I have prepared the old rice vault. It will hold what must not travel into the new world. The old rice vault. The phrase sent the excavation team back into the ruins south of the main house, where a collapsed storage foundation had been dismissed as agricultural debris. Under the broken brick, they found a fill passage. Not a room that had collapsed naturally. A room that had been packed deliberately with oyster shell, clay, ash, and lime. Layer by layer, as if someone wanted the space erased and preserved at the same time. Inside were the remains of 31 people. The number on the slate. The archaeologists did not publish the details for years. They notified state authorities. They contacted churches and local historical societies. They compared buttons, letters, carved initials, and scraps of paper against missing notices and family inquiries from the 1840s and 1850s. A few identities were recovered. Most were not. The slate remained the closest thing to a memorial. 31 names. 31 first names. The kind of names a person says when there is no time for surnames, records, titles, or proof. Esther, Malachi, Rose, Den, Tilda, Lottie. But even that discovery was not the final truth. The final truth was hidden in the blue thread packet. Ada had written several late entries in a cipher that mixed household measurements, biblical chapter numbers, and shipping abbreviations. It took 3 researchers nearly a year to decode the last pages. The public version of Bellweather had always blamed Silas. That was easy. Silas had signed the contracts. Silas had built the transfer business. Silas had modified the house. Silas had opened the door to the first deception. But Ada's final coded confession made the machinery of blame collapse. She wrote, "It is useful that history will imagine him stronger than he was. Men are given both crimes and credit easily. I have let his name stand before mine like a shutter. But the shutter is not the wall. For 3 years the keys have been mine." Then, near the bottom of the same page, he would have bargained. He would have delayed. He would have trusted luck. I trusted order. I chose the vault. That line is why the Bellweather journals remain so disturbing. Not because they reveal one cruel man. History has never lacked cruel men. They disturb because they reveal how a household, a marriage, a business, a neighborhood, and a set of polite documents can work together until cruelty no longer feels like an interruption. It feels like management. Ada Fenwick did not wake up one morning transformed. She moved there one rationalization at a time. One cut page. One adjusted schedule. One basket sent down after midnight. One lie accepted because telling the truth would have cost her position, comfort, name, and safety. At the beginning, she wrote like a woman afraid of the sounds beneath her floor. At the end, she wrote like a woman offended that the sounds had become inconvenient. When Union forces passed through the region in 1865, Bellweather House was already mostly empty. Silas and Ada told officers that most of their workers had fled months earlier. Their surviving household staff repeated the same account. The hidden chambers had been scrubbed. The bell wires had been removed. The pantry floor had been repaired. The old rice vault had been sealed so completely that even the estate's later owners never found it. Silas died in 1871. Ada lived until 1883. Her obituary praised her composure during the war and called her a woman of uncommon discipline. There it was again. Discipline, order, composure. Words that sound virtuous until you learn what they were protecting. For nearly a century, Bellweather sank back into the marsh. The roof failed. The chimneys split. Cypress roots pushed through the service yard. Hunters avoided the pantry ruins because they said sound changed there. Dogs refused to cross the old foundation. Local children told stories about a bell that rang under the ground after storms. No one believed them. Not until 1974, when the storm took the floor apart and the slate came out of the wall. Today, Bellweather is not marked on most maps. The land is private marsh and pine scrub. The house is gone except for bricks, a few foundation stones, and the broken mouth of the old cistern. The journals are stored in restricted archives, copied in fragments, argued over by historians, and handled only by people wearing gloves. But the slate has been photographed. 31 names. One sentence. Tell them we were never sent on. That was the truth Bellweather could not manage. Not with ledgers. Not with keys. Not with a vault.
Not with a century of marsh growth and polite forgetting. The house was built to swallow sound, but it failed at one thing. It could not swallow the names.